Well, welcome back to our class on discipleship and disciple making. This is our 6th session and the last session with Dr. Gwen Ebner. Thank you for being with us during these sessions.
Wonderful. Yes, I've enjoyed it.
Well, we have come quite a ways and wanted to do a bit of a summary up until now. In these first 5 sessions, we've talked about a number of things. The first session, what is discipleship? And what is a disciple maker? Mm-hmm. In the second session, we talked about the biblical picture of discipleship, especially what Jesus had to say about it. Mm-hmm. The third session, we talked about non-discipleship and discipleship. And then in the fourth session, the various building blocks, desire to be like Jesus and a passion for His Word. And then in the 5th session, the third building block was a willingness to live in community and how discipleship involves community with God and community with others. Today we're going to try and bring all of these different strands together. And Gwen, would you be willing to comment on tying these together to get us started?
As I look at this, I believe God's ultimate purpose was to have a relationship with us. He started from the beginning in relationship with, together in the triune God, and He established Adam to have relationship with Him, and then someone for Adam to have a relationship. He wants us to glorify Him throughout His life as we are in relationship with Him, and He wants to restore us, in a sense, back to that relationship that was formed in the Garden of Eden. It's always been about a relationship. And it seems like that sin usually does that problem, it messes that problem up, the relationship. And it happened with Adam and Eve, and it will happen and happens with us. And God then comes and invites us through Jesus to come back to Him and relationship with others as we have relationship with Him. In the Old Testament, we find God envisioning a special people, like we said, Israel, the people of Israel. They too had a continuous sin problem, and He wanted that special relationship with them, which was broken by their sin problem as well. And in the New Testament, we find God sending His Son Jesus to be the ultimate sacrifice, to take care of the sin problem once and for all, so that we could be restored to a relationship with God. And Jesus called this and these people His church. And I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. There was now a plan that would help God's people to succeed, and God's plan to succeed. Jesus would pay a price so that God's people, His church, could live in community and relationship with Him and with each other. So, part of the purpose of sending Jesus, I believe, was that He could show us who God was, and He could show us how to live in community with each other, and show us how then to win others, or help others then to be in community in relationship with God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So He showed us who God was, and Jesus knew that He would not be on earth forever. So He had to do something that would help once He was gone, that this would continue. So He made disciples who would then carry this message and be trained by Him to respond, so that they would not only be forgiven, but that they could be in relationship with God, and they could then go out and make disciples after Jesus was no longer here on earth. And they did that very thing. They turned the world upside down as they helped others come into relationship with Jesus Christ. So God's vision for the church is His ultimate purpose and our ultimate calling. And God's worked through someone to get this message to you, to get this message to me, to get this message to everyone who's taken this class or listening to this. He's worked through others to help us, and He likewise wants us to then pass this message on to other people, because we won't be here on earth forever either, just like Jesus wasn't here on earth forever. And there will need to be a continuing number of people who gets the message from us, that can pass the message on to other people. I want to remind us of something I said before in one of the other sessions. we are creating a community, a culture in our church, whether we realize it or not. It's either the culture of disciple making or of non-disciple making, of non-discipleship. So whether we are purposefully doing it, we're creating one or the other within our church, even unintentionally. And the question is, what is the culture that we're creating? I think that's what everyone has to ask themselves. What is the culture that you're creating in your church? And we can change that if we desire to. And if we get it, if we get what God's plan was to, bring that to us through Jesus, and that then for us to pass it on, if we get that starting with the relationship and down, we're going to pass that message on. And so if we accept the invitation to follow Christ as a disciple maker, and then we model it to others, and then we spend time with them so they can invite others on the journey, and they do the same thing so they can invite others on the journey, it's going to continue the process of making disciples. Sometimes I think we think making disciples is a separate job from our regular life as a Christian. So it seems like something we have to tag on and do. So it seems kind of, I don't feel adequate in the first place. And so if I have to tag it on and do it separate from everything else I'm doing, then it's going to be overwhelming. But it's not a special program. It's not a special extra thing we have to do. It's not something we set aside to do particularly in one particular place. Jesus made it a part of everything he did. Jesus didn't say, guys, let's go make disciples right now, He did send them out in twos at times to share and to help people. But as he was going, whatever he was doing, it wasn't separated from his life. It occurred as he was going through life. And if something showed up and happened and he wasn't knowing it was going to happen, he stopped there and participated in it. Whether it's the woman with the issue of blood, or whether it was, the Pharisees bringing someone to him that they wanted him to accuse, whatever it was that he could take part in, he stopped and became a part of that. And it wasn't separate from his life. It was a part of his life. And he kept himself sensitive to God so that he could notice when God was at work in and out of places of his life, at the service station, riding a plane, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, it belongs to God. And I have to tell you that a while back I decided that every time I got ready to go somewhere and do something, whether it's vacation, whether it's getting on a plane, whether it's getting in my car, I'm going to say, God, I'm yours. I belong to you right now. Whoever you want me to meet, whatever you want me to say, it belongs to you. And I'm available. I sign up, And so I found that lately, that last couple years, every time I get on a plane, I have a God conversation with people because I'm ready, I'm open. I actually pray over the seat that I pick before I get on there. Lord, help me to pick the seat of the person you want me to talk to. And I've had continuing relationships with people I've met on a plane. I have a relationship. A girl texted me yesterday, and she's in the Army, and she texted me and said, hey, let's get together. I've just moved to a new place close to you, and we could get to see each other. We've only seen each other once on a plane, but we've been communicating by email, phone, and text messaging for a year. Wow. And I've claimed this woman for Christ. And I met her, and she was across the aisle from me, talking out loud over the aisle, a person who has no community and no relationships that was hungry for Christ. And as we make ourselves available, as we are going, as we are a part of life, those things happen, and that's what Jesus did. And we just join God in what he's doing. God is doing something all the time. We join him in what he's doing, and then it's effective because his power is already at work in it. So discipleship doesn't have to necessarily be something that's separate. It's something that's a part of everything we do.
It's integral to our very lives as Christians. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you say more about what you mean by God being on a mission and joining him in what he is doing?
Mm-hmm. Well, God says he sees yesterday, he sees today, and he sees tomorrow. So he has the big picture. Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. He's got the whole picture. And so he knows where opportunities lie. He knows he'll lead us to them as we listen to him. He knows that if we make ourselves available, that we can join him in what he is doing, in fact, in the lives of people. I don't know the people I meet who's already got a desire for God or has been kind of thinking about things. I have no clue of that. Like this woman I met on the plane a year ago, I had no clue of that, but she was hungry for Christ. And as I began my conversation, she never took her eyes off me in an hour flight because she was interested in what God was going to do, could do through here in my story. Mike Breen offers some suggestions on how to join God in what he's doing, and I'd like to share this with you. He says, as you're going about life, walk with your eyes open and your ears listening to the Spirit. Now that means that we have to have less things scheduled in our life than there are hours to do. That means we have to have some blank spaces or the ability to do things that God shows us at the moment they're going to happen. So if we go about life and every single second and even more is programmed out or on our calendar, we have no place for God to be at work. And one of the things that I've learned in the last few years after some crisis that I went through was that I quit planning a whole lot of things. You know, I have certain things that I must do, but I try to leave space open to say, what serendipitously do you want to use me for today, God? I want to be available, whether it's a phone call, whether it's someone I meet, whether it's, a text message, whatever it is, I want to be available for what God is going to do. And then secondly, Breen says, as you are sharing or interacting with people, now you're available, you're open, God leads you to someone. As you're sharing and interacting with people, be sensitive to the person and their openness. Breen calls a person that's open a person of peace. I think what he's saying is they're open to hearing, they're open to listen. And it's sort of like going to a tree and picking a green apple. It's not going to taste good and it's not time to bring it off the tree. We want to be sensitive and open to a person who is open to listening, and God will lead us to those people. And when he does, we'll join him in what he's doing because he's already been at work. And then the third thing that Mike Breen says is be sensitive to the Spirit about who is ready, and I think I just said that, and prepared to hear the message of Christ. It's no good to force open doors or try to convince people. In some ways, what we do is we hinder the gospel when we try to force people if God's not already visibly active and they're open to him in their lives. And so I think those are a few things that we can do to be sensitive and to start allowing us to join God in what he's doing. Now, I'd like us to go through kind of just a little sketch of Jesus' life and see how Jesus operated with people. I have a website, personalgrowthforme.com, and on it I have some spiritual exercises. And one of the exercises is walking with Jesus through the Gospels. And the purpose of that is to pay attention to Jesus and to see what he does, and then to imitate what he's doing through the Spirit, of course, but watch what he's doing and then do what he does, okay? And we're going to be much more likely to succeed if he's already shown us the way and God is opening the opportunities for those ways. So let's take a look at some of the people that Jesus interacts with and how he did it, and it'll give us an idea of his regular life and his making disciples. Some of this is what we call evangelism, but it's also making disciples, remember, in Matthew 28. First person comes to my mind is Zacchaeus. I like him. He was a short man. I'm only 5 foot, so I like Zacchaeus all the way from the start. And the interesting thing about this, Jesus was simply entering a town, Jericho, and he was just passing through, so Jesus didn't have an intention to stop and talk to Zacchaeus. And you might run into a Zacchaeus sometime in your life soon. You're passing through and here's a Zacchaeus. Now Zacchaeus must have heard of Jesus, or he must have heard about him, and so he's curious. His curiosity is up. And he's so short he cannot see him when he comes through town. So Zacchaeus does an amazing thing that shows he's interested. He climbs a tree to get a better look. Now, you will find people doing interesting things sometimes, like the woman that talked across the aisle out loud to me, and everyone I'm sure around us heard us for an hour. But she was interested. She was climbing a tree because she was interested in who Jesus was in my life and what made my life different. So Jesus sees Zacchaeus. He's open to him. He stops. He takes the time, and he asks him if he can come to his house. That's pretty gutsy, and be his guest. He doesn't know this man, but he's going to be his guest and come to his house, and Zacchaeus is glad to. Well, we know Zacchaeus, salvation came to his house. He received Christ. And so that was a pretty amazing opportunity as he happened walking through a town. I hope we have opportunities like that. Another person comes to my mind is in the 4th chapter of John. And Jesus is going through a town called Samaria. And the Samaritans weren't always so acceptable. So you might meet people in culture that aren't acceptable to other people. They're either so rude that no one wants to talk to them, or they might be of a different culture, or handicapped, disabled. Whatever it might be, you might meet somebody who is different that other people maybe don't accept. And Jesus did this very day. He was probably thirsty after having walked a while, so he sits down at a well. A well is a public place where people come to meet some personal physical need of their life, to get water. And it just so happened a woman who most men wouldn't talk to, and it's a Samaritan woman who most Jewish men would not talk to. She comes to the well. Jesus wasn't planning to talk to her, but as he sat down and she came, God probably had it planned out, but he begins to interact with her. And throughout the interaction at an ordinary place, the woman is open, and salvation comes to her house too. He invites her not to just drink the water at this well, but there's a water that she will never thirst again. And he takes the issue of water that began the conversation as he asked for a drink, and he invites her to a water that will satisfy her quenching thirst. So sometimes we can use, as we are invited to, in a situation we find ourselves with people, maybe there's a commonality or something we can ask of them, or something that can be a commonality to start a conversation with, as Jesus did here. And she runs back and carries it back to her community. She's so excited. Come see a man that knows everything about me. I mean, this woman's excited. She becomes an immediate disciple and evangelist. Another, and if you have anything to say about these people, please speak up, because they're exciting stories. Another time, Jesus is in the region of Judea, and a young man, we've often called him the rich young ruler in the scriptures, but a young man, a ruler, comes. It said, if you can just picture this with your senses, he's in this place, this community, this region of Judea, and this man runs. It says he runs up to Jesus, and he actually kneels down in front of him. And so he initiates the conversation with Jesus. And it says that in the conversation, Jesus gives him an answer to his longing. But he's not ready for this answer, because the answer is going to mean that he has to give up something. And he's going to have to replace it with something else. And what Jesus asked him to give up was to sell all he had and give it to the poor. Whether Jesus really literally meant that he had to do it, as the same thing true with Abraham, kill your son. You know, Jesus needed to know that he was willing to sacrifice that and make him first, God first in his life. And the man walked away sorrowfully because he couldn't do it. And so there's going to be times when we're going to encounter people that we go to make disciples that are going to choose that they're not ready to pay the price of what discipleship means, and they're going to walk away. And we have to allow them to do that. Another time finds Jesus in the church, of all places, in the church, in the temple even, and he's teaching in the temple. And these people interrupt him as he's teaching. I don't know if you've ever had anyone interrupt you while you're teaching, but I've had a few disturbances through the time I've been teaching. And you keep your cool. That's the thing you got to do, is keep your cool. But anyway, these people were trying to trap Jesus, and they were going to trap him with this woman that they said they caught in adultery. And Jesus models discipleship by offering grace to the woman as he is teaching the men something at the same time. So at this point, we've got several people who are learning from Jesus, not only the woman that they brought, but these men who think they're going to have him teach her something or do something, kill her, maybe even have her take her life taken. And Jesus is very interesting in the way he graces and teaches. He says, he's writing in the sand first. Who knows? Maybe some of their sins were written. Who knows what was written in the sand? But he says, let any one of you who is without sin throw the first stone. Throw the first stone at her if you have no sin, if you're without sin. So really who he's talking to is these guys right here. Are you without sin? If you are, you have the right to throw the first stone, because then you're not deceived by your own sin. And every one of them, one by one, walked away. And then Jesus had his moment with her. He saw the sincerity of her heart, and he says, so neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Go and leave your life of sin. And I bet she did. I bet that was a teaching moment. And I don't know if we have moments like that where an example of grace or an example of something else that we give offers people that. But I believe that was an amazing way that Jesus handled the discipleship moment. I want to mention one more, because I've tried to pick out totally different kinds of situations. And the last one is at nighttime. Someone comes at night, probably trying to hide because they don't want anyone else to know that they're interested. And we may have people like this in our life. Don't tell anyone I'm talking to you about this. In some ways they might say that, but they're curious and they want to know. It was in Jerusalem, and this man actually was a Jew of the ruling council. So he's kind of important and has a reason to hide, because other people of his like would not have liked Jesus very well. But he found himself interested and available to Jesus, and available that night to God as well. Nicodemus is his name, and he finds Jesus and wants to have a conversation. And they have quite a lengthy conversation. Some interesting things take place. You can read it in the 3rd chapter of John. We aren't informed in this passage what the outcome is. We don't know. I kind of think Nicodemus was someone who really wanted Jesus and probably came after him. But Jesus offers these famous words that are really, really important as we look at making disciples. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. The gospel. In one verse, he has given us the gospel. Why God sent Jesus into the world. He sent him not to condemn the world. Jesus had just demonstrated that with the woman at the well and in the woman caught in adultery. That he wasn't sending Jesus to the world to condemn the world, but that to save the world through him. So, as we see, Jesus wasn't usually scheduling these interactions. He was available. And that's what we've got to be, is available. Make ourselves available. And he was out in public, and people came to him. He went to them. The conversations happened when he was on his way. The Spirit led him to places into the world where people were going to be. And Jesus will do these same things for us. If we'll be sensitive, he will do the same for us. We can be just like Jesus in that way.
As you were telling those stories, I was thinking about those encounters and how they often contain a surprise.
Yeah.
One surprise, of course, would be one of the rulers evoking one of Jesus' most simple expressions of the gospel. It wasn't something profound that was just for the scholars, but it was simple enough that anybody can understand. Another, of course, the fellow that had everything, we would think could be, and he possibly could have been a major player in impacting people, but he's the one who who walked away, whether he was definitely unwilling at the time, but whether he was just a fruit that wasn't quite ripe yet or not, we don't know. But some of the other ones that probably we would not have picked as disciples, but the Lord did, and the Lord saw amazing things. The one lady, of course, being instrumental in her entire town being impacted. So those surprises are kind of amazing. And then another thing that jumps out along that line is how some of the biggest surprises, how the Lord can use somebody so apparently unqualified or insignificant. And
the disciples were the same way, really, when you talk about it.
Yeah, and some of us, feel the same way. Like, how can the Lord
sign
use
up. I know I can't do it without God.
But that's just it. The Lord chooses the small things to do some of His greatest works, and the weak things to demonstrate His power.
I also think of the story of after Jesus, then we see Paul. And we see Stephen, and we see so many different stories, but the one that hits me right now is Paul and Silas. They find themselves in jail for something they didn't really do wrong, and God uses them to make a disciple.
Yeah.
The jailer and his family come to the Lord. And so we never know. I always try to remember when I'm in a situation or I'm in a delay, don't worry, God can use that situation or that delay for His purpose. So what I want to do is to have a gratitude attitude so that God can use that, keep me in the right place to be available to what He wants to do there.
Yes. And I think it's a relief to know that the Lord is on a mission. It is His mission. He knows what He's doing, and He's always at work. And it's also helpful to remember that He has a plan, and along the way, He pulls us into it, joining Him in what He's already doing, like you had said before. But His plan was to not always be on the earth, but to set in motion a process of disciples who make other disciples, who then make other disciples. And that's where we come into this. Though maybe we don't feel equipped or prepared, it's the Lord at work, and He is able to use even folks like us in doing that. Can you comment on that somewhat?
Yeah, I think that the less likely we feel that we're capable, the more likely we can be used. And I know that it's not I am a bad person, or I'm not good, or I'm not a good person, or I'm not capable, I don't have any gifts or strengths. That's not the point. It's to realize our dependence upon Christ. And man, when we're dependent on Christ, we cannot do it ourselves. But God shows up, and He does it through us. And our major point is to glorify God. Our purpose in life is to glorify God. And if we see everywhere we go and whatever we do as to glorify God, we will glorify God, because that will be our main purpose in life.
So the Lord has this plan once He poured the Holy Spirit out into the world and began to see the church rise and more disciples. His purpose was to pass along through their testimony and through their word. Talk to us about that.
Well, rather than Jesus trying to frantically reach the whole world by Himself, it seems almost nonsense that He picked out 12 people that He spent most of His time with. Doesn't that sound silly? I mean, He should have been out there, and He was. I mean, He talked to multitudes at times on the hillside. He fed thousands of people. I mean, He did at times reach out, and we will at times speak to people, whether it's a crowd of people, whether it's a small group of people we're with, we will have those moments. But Jesus centered His life on 12 people that He built Himself into. And then those people were able then to build theirself into others because they had seen it and experienced it happening within theirself. And Jesus reproduced Himself in those number, and then He told those disciples to do the same. And that began the process of multiplication. Now, in other words, we're not supposed to just do addition when we're talking about this process. We're supposed to do multiplication. Addition would be, I'm a pastor or an evangelist, and I go out and speak that, and I win some people to Christ through my sermon, or whatever. Or one time I speak to a person, they accept Christ, and I never see that person again. Whatever. He said that's addition. What I want you to do is multiply. I want you to build yourself in the life of someone else in such a way that they know what to do now because they've seen you doing it in them and they've experienced it. And then they're going to go out, and every person you do is going to reach someone who's going to reach someone who's going to reach someone, hopefully, as they continue to get trained. And that is going to be multiplication after a while. Now, I'm going to give you an example. In the book, The Invitation by Greg Siders, it was an exciting chart. I'm not always excited about charts, but this one was exciting. He said he's comparing two people. The evangelist that goes out and he leads one person to Christ every day. Let's see if he led 365 people to Christ in a year. That's one a day. We're going to compare that with a person, one person who goes out, a disciple-making person who leads one person to Christ one a year, and spends the rest of the year discipling them. Do you get the picture now? 365 people that are just won to Christ, and one person won to Christ and discipled for a solid year. What do you think is going to happen in these two illustrations? It's pretty amazing if you've seen the chart. Now, I'll tell you, by year 12, the evangelist had birthed 4,380 new Christians. That's pretty cool. If you did 365 a year, that in itself is great. Now, we don't know if those people were following the Lord after they were evangelized, because we don't know if anyone took it up and helped them to get involved in the community of faith. So there's that problem too, is if you just lead someone to Christ and no one disciples them, we don't know if that sticks. You know what I'm saying? So he did 4,380. The disciple maker yielded in 12 years 1,024. The evangelist is still ahead, okay, even with multiplication. However, the next year, year 13, the disciple maker has birthed more than the evangelist. Because once you get a certain number of people and you multiply, it's going to be much more than adding. So in the 13th year, the disciple maker had over 8,000, where the evangelist had 4,000. 8 to 4,000. And by year 30, the evangelist has birthed 10,950 new Christians, and the disciple maker has yielded over 1 billion. Now, I agree, that's saying that the person you disciple makes one person in a year, leads one person in a year, and they disciple them. But the same thing occurs here, that these people may not be as faith after they are too. But if that continued to happen, over 1 billion people in 30 years, we could win the world for Christ in that way. And by year 33, the disciple maker has yielded over 8 billion. Wow, it's growing fast now as we multiply. That's why Jesus said, go make disciples. Don't go make converts, because converts are going to be addition. Disciples are going to be multiplication. And that makes me excited about the people that I disciple. That's multiplication instead of addition. And the evangelist was doing all the work alone. The disciple maker was doing it with others. They were discipling others who were discipling others, like Jesus did, and changing the world. And when we invest in other people, we too can turn the world upside down, our world, our community, our place in which we live. And it's been said, a chain is only as strong as what?
Its weakest link.
It's the weakest link. And in addition, we get a lot of weak links. But in multiplication, we get disciple making that's strong. People who have been walked with and are really supported through their relationship with God.
Yeah, so there the contrast again, we're replicating ourselves, and it's either a healthy self or it's an unhealthy self that we're replicating.
And we would have never expected Jesus to form his life around 12 people, even though he did, speak occasionally to others. To form his life around 12 people, it seems ludicrous, doesn't it? But he proved it worked.
Yeah.
And why do we think that we should do otherwise and
Yeah.
not really spend and build ourselves into other people, Christ in them?
I remember that one comment in Acts where they looked at the disciples and said they saw that they were just unschooled fishermen. And yet we see in church history what those unschooled fishermen were used to do. The Lord transformed the world through those people. As you describe it there, you make it sound as though disciple making is something that we all can be involved in, that it's not some special training course that teaches us how to do this. It's being a disciple of the Lord that prepares us for this. Can you talk about that?
I think that's what's held us back the most, is we think it takes special training. And, you know, if the disciples hadn't made it in the turn of Jewish boys that went on to be under a rabbi, obviously they hadn't made it because they were out doing fishing and other kinds of things that they were doing. So they hadn't made the cut, you know, they weren't in it. And so they could have just as easily said, I can't do this. I'm not these great guys that have memorized the whole Bible, you know, and the whole Pentateuch or the whole Old Testament, and I'm not capable of doing this. And I don't have adequate preparation. I'm not ready. And you might feel that way, or other people, you know, listening might feel that way. I'm not prepared. I'm not ready. But yes, you are. Yes, you are. It's not dependent on you. It is absolutely not dependent on you. Now, I will give you that part of your preparation is spending time with Jesus every day. And as you are in the Word, you're learning things. As you have a passion to watch what Jesus did, you're learning things about Him. As you have a passion to be in community, you are going to learn from other people as well. You're going to be soaking up so much training you won't even realize it, because God is preparing you. As you do the building blocks of discipleship, you're being prepared to be a disciple. And everything you've been learning since you became a Christian has equipped you. As you've watched people that built their life in you and helped you, you've been watching that along the way. And if you're becoming sensitive to God's voice, He will show you what to do. That's one of the most important things I've learned, is not to be so busy and so running around and so about myself that I can't just let it go and say, God, where you're at, I'm going to be sensitive to what you're doing. And I'm going to listen. I'm going to keep my conscience really in tune with you. I'm going to keep my heart in tune with you. And Brother Lawrence wrote this book called Practicing the Presence of God. And I teach it in my spiritual direction class because I believe it's one of the most important principles we can learn, is how to learn to be with Jesus all day long. Now, that's not meaning you can't focus on your job or you can't talk to somebody else. It means you have a sense of Him with you all day, speaking through you or showing you what to do. And when you learn that presence, wherever you go, God's going to show you what to do. And have you ever had something come out of your mouth that you don't know if you ever said it before, or if you were anyone even said it to you? The Holy Spirit said it through you. That's the kind of thing that we know will happen as we trust God to use us with other people. And I think He's equipping us all the time through that. But actually, Jesus does have a plan for making disciples. Can I share it with you?
Sure, please
I'm
do.
sure you've never heard this plan before. He's got you on a training that you will not believe. It's a great training. And it's found in the Bible. And He said the first thing you do is go. That's an imperative. You are to go. And or as you are going, as I said. And He tells someone who is open about Christ, give them an opportunity to receive Christ. This is in the going step here. We got 3 steps to discipleship. Jesus gives us. Go. And after you give them an opportunity to accept Christ, and they do, then explain to them the cost of following Jesus so they know right up front what it is. And then that they will need to be a lifetime learner of Jesus. This is a journey for a lifetime. That needs to be said right up front as we go and we speak to someone about Christ and they receive Him. That's the go step. And then the second step is baptize. Because He says in here what you're doing is making disciples, so we can take that as the whole steps of what we're doing. So go and baptize. Now, why would He tell us to do that? That's a verb too. Well, teach them first about baptism. What does baptism mean? Why did Jesus get baptized himself? Why did Jesus tell people, why did John the Baptist baptize people? Why is it that we see in the New Testament they're saved and baptized? That's because it wasn't an optional teaching. It's about an imperative, and a very important imperative, because there's something about going public with a decision that you have made that helps you be held accountable for what you just said. And I find if people are not willing to be baptized, chances are they're not willing to pay the cost of being a disciple. And so baptism is a very important step. After the going and, telling them the cost and that they're a lifetime learner, then you baptize them. And then they get an opportunity to transform their faith into an action that's in front of the community of faith, and maybe even in front of some of their family that they bring. I saw a neat video one time. It was of a church whoever won that person to Christ or brought them to Christ or to the church got to stand in the baptismal pool with the pastor and help baptize that person. And then they were told, this person, or they were told to go take that person and make a disciple out of them. And so it was an understanding that you led them, you were in the baptism with them, so you're doing this baptism step, and now you're going to go and help to make a disciple of that person as you teach them and spend time with them. So that's an important step, baptism. And then third, this is the biggest step of all, is teach them to obey everything I have commanded. How long do you think that's going to take? Everything he's commanded. A lifetime. So Jesus is saying, really, it's going to take a lifetime to teach that. And you won't always be the teacher of everyone that you disciple, the whole teacher. You'll be the teacher for a while, and they'll have other teachers that'll come forward to do it. But Jesus has commanded us in this situation, I believe, not to just impart knowledge, but he wants us to demonstrate and teach them how to have a relationship with God, to talk and listen to God, show them how to eat. How are they going to be nourished? How are they going to be informed through reading God's Word? How's that going to give them what they need to go through life? And find out where they're struggling and allow them to see how God's Word can help them in their struggles. That's an important thing to do with a disciple. Everyone's got an Achilles heel or something that's a problem that can stumble them up. They can stumble as they follow Christ. So not only how do you pray and talk to God, how do you read God's Word, how do you get through those life circumstances that could really pull you down? That's really important. Also, check back with them. It's accountability. Stay in contact. The early church had continued relationships with each other that helped them to stay in touch with someone's everyday life. And we have a lot of places that could be helpful things for that. Text messaging. I'm discipling a young woman right now, and we do text messages. We call on the phone, and we meet in person. There's lots of ways and see each other at church. So there's lots of ways that we can spend time with them. We need to be doing two things, Breen says. One is affirming, and the other word he uses is challenging, and he uses horse whispering in this terminology. Okay, remember that in Breen's book, if you've read that book on discipleship. And he says that you need to people will get discouraged if all you do is challenge them. It'll sound like, you never do anything right. But challenging is important, but you also have to encourage. And as you encourage, that causes them to come towards you and feel good. And then you then can challenge. So there's both of those things that we do when we're working with a disciple. But ultimately, we're teaching them to obey everything Jesus has said. And he said the things he said for a reason, because he knew we'd need to know them. And finally, so you've got 3 steps: go, baptize, teach. And then there's sort of a step, but it's not a step, it's really a reassurance. And he says that I will be with you. Jesus said, I will be with you. And always, I'm going to always be with you. Everywhere you go, I will go with you. And there's no expiration date on this deal. No expiration date, because he says to the very end of the age. It's a promise, and he promises to be with us everywhere we go. And really, that is the essence of what he has taught us about discipleship. Now, it'll be different with each person we are working with, but that's what we do. We go, help them to move into baptism, and then we teach them to obey what God has said and to be in relationship with Him.
As you were describing that, I was reminded of an image that you used earlier in the course, image of running the race. And it occurred to me as this course unfolded that I was a runner too, and I was a bit of a loner, and so I can appreciate this whole Lone Ranger thing that we've talked about being a rut in the church. And yet one of the races I was involved in was a relay race, and part of the rules about the relay races, in a sense, there are of course rules about how the runners ran, but a relay race was all about the baton that got passed along. So actually the race was won when the first baton crossed the finish line. And the successful passing of the baton was an important part of that race. If the baton did not get passed, it was not a successful race. And it just struck me as a powerful
picture. Yeah.
Yes, when I think of the Christian life, it's not an option. It's not a Lone Ranger kind of a scenario. The Christian faith is all about us embarking in this race, but then being involved in the passing of the baton along the way, and how that baton gets successfully passed along is pretty much the measure of whether we are doing this well or not.
And that gives me a picture, an interesting picture I never thought of, is that all through the ages, the one baton is passed from people we'll never know in the past to people we'll never know in the future, who is passing this baton, and we sure don't want to drop it right now where we live.
No, and then carrying it and passing it on is not optional. It's inherent in the whole process. It's what the Christian faith, what Christian discipleship, disciple making is all about.
Yes, I love it. I love it.
So as we bring this final session with you to a close, what comments would you like to end with?
Well, I'd like us to end with the analogy of this race that you just talked about. I think that Paul mentions it enough times that it is pertinent for us to hook this up with our understanding of discipleship and our walk with Christ. 1 Corinthians 9:24, Paul says to the church of Corinth, run in such a way to win, he says. Run to get the prize. And for us, the prize isn't just to be first and to go around this racetrack and to end first. What's our prize? The high calling in Christ Jesus ultimately will be in eternity with Him. But our running is to glorify Him, and we run ourselves to get that prize and to run in such a way. Now, if you're going to run in such a way to get a prize, how are you going to run? You're going to just take your time. You're going to...
Intentionally and wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. I have two son-in-laws that are runners, and one has won national prizes in running. I mean, he's run trail racing, he's run regular racing. He lives in Colorado now, and he runs up Pikes Peak. I mean, he's serious about this, and I'm telling you, he thinks about things that I don't even think about because I'm not running a race like that. But that's the way the Christian must be. He thinks about the clothes he wears. He thinks about what he eats before the race. He thinks about what he eats after the race. He thinks about things that weigh him down, things that would cause him to not run as well. He thinks about how he's going to keep his health up so he'll feel good to race. You know, he thinks about who he's racing with, and sometimes he'll find himself in a race with people that will encourage each other on, race alongside so to encourage each other. I mean, there's all kinds of things that I see him do, but ultimately his goal is to run in order to win. And it's a way, you know, to run in such a way to get the prize. And he'll look at all those factors in order to run that race to do that. And then Galatians 5:7, he's talking to the Galatians this time. He says, you were running a race, a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? Wow. He's getting right to the point. You were running a race, and what happened to keep you from obeying the truth? And if you're not obedient to the truth, you're not going to run a very good race. And so some of these pictures he has of races are going to give us an understanding of what might keep us from running the race, this race of discipleship, this race of that's being formed in Christ, we might call it, maturing in Christ, whatever word you want to give it. But you were running a race and something cut you off from doing that. And then 2 Timothy 4:7, he gives us an understanding of something he feels. He's telling Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. That, he says, is his goal, to run a serious race, a good race, and finish it, and then to keep the faith through the whole thing. And I get this picture that you kind of mentioned, and it kind of stands out to me, almost like you're in a stadium, and there's all these people sitting around watching you run the race. And some of these people, you might look in there and see your grandmother, or you might see your father who's passed. Mine just passed this year. My father's sitting in those places out there, you know. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, is sitting there. Grandma's sitting there, who loved God in her heart, every bit of her heart. Had 19 children and loved them too. I don't know how, 19, you know. But, you know, ultimately there's going to be people in my life that have already passed that are sitting in there, as well as people of the faith like we've talked about, Abraham and you know, Paul and Peter and the disciples and all these people of the faith. And I just want to picture, it may not be what's literally happening at this moment, that they're standing there, and some of them have affected our lives, whether it's through the scripture, we've read about them, and they've discipled us through the example of how they've ran their race, or the people that's been directly in our path in our lifetime who showed us how to run the race with Jesus. It could even have been a Sunday school teacher, or it could have been a pastor, but they help us run the race. And the writer of Hebrews says these words, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, there are great clouds of them, of people through the ages who've been passing this baton you're talking about. Let us throw off everything. He doesn't say a few things. Throw off everything that hinders us from running this race, and the sin that so easily entangles us up to make us slow down our race or get off the racetrack for a while, you know. And let us run with perseverance. That's a pretty strong word, perseverance, the race that's marked out for us. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, that's what we're supposed to fix our eyes on, who's the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Well, we could spend a whole lot of time with this passage here. And I'd like to ask, what hinders you from running your race? What hinders you? You know, what's keeping your appetite away? What's hindering you from doing a good race? Are you weighed down by some stuff that distracts you from keeping your eyes on Jesus and keeping your race going? Are you over here getting all mixed up by this stuff? Maybe it's hurts from the past. Maybe it's, it could just be anything. It could be stuff in our bag that we carry with us. Unforgiveness. It could be hurts. It could be attitudes we have that we're not willing to give up. It could be like the rich young ruler, his possessions that he couldn't give up, you know, or it could be habits and addictions, the woman that was caught in adultery, or the woman at the well that probably wasn't married either, coming at noon of the day because she was an outcast of some sort. Whatever it is that's hindering our race, man, we need to look at it. I do not want to give up my race for anything. And I want to look at what's hindering me. And that's where a good accountability partner or another person who loves God can help you. You know, you're watching my life. What is hindering my life? And let me tell you some things that I get distracted by. And share that together. Pray with each other. Whatever it is, help each other to run that race with perseverance. And to throw those things off that's entangling us, and to keep our eyes centrally fixed on Jesus as we run this race. And finally, Paul says these words, to the leaders of Ephesus. I consider my life worth nothing to me. And he doesn't mean I'm worthless. He means I've let go of my life. It's all nothing according to other things around me. And here's what he says, is nothing to. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task the Lord has given me. The task of testifying to the good news of God's grace. And he said, I consider my life worth nothing in light of Christ. You know, and my only aim in life is to finish the race. If that was your only real aim in life, was to finish the race of God, you would finish it. You would finish it. And testifying to the good news of God's great grace. And you know, the persons that you disciple are going to know if you're serious about running the race. And, you know, you'll have to step up, and that's okay. As we are leading others through discipleship, we're going through it ourselves because we're stepping up every time we ask them to step up, if we're serious about it. And I just want to say to everyone, run to finish the race. Run, run, run. Don't stop. You know, passing the baton is important. And getting those into the next generation and those around us and those who were lost, run the race to finish it and to influence those people for Christ and to testify, like Paul says, to the good news of God's grace. It'll be worth it. And man, when we get to heaven, we can share the stories of the race we ran, and the people will be there that we've walked through that journey with us. And it's exciting. It's exciting. I get excited.
Well, you've already thrown out a couple challenges here. The challenge to throw off the things that hinder us and to be certain to run our race well. And
you need the Bible to tell you how to run a race. That's your book. That's your book on how to run the race.
Do you have a final challenge for us?
I do. And the challenge I'd like to ask you is, will you join me in being a disciple maker? And you know what that means now. You've spent 6 sessions with us. Will you join me in that exciting journey of creating a culture of disciple making? Bless you as you do.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thanks for inviting me.